We're not yet? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Flood, representing BEST. That's the Bermuda Environmental Sustainability Task Force. And I'd like to welcome to the second presentation in the third series of the Bermuda College and BEST Lunch and Learn presentations. The Lunch and Learn series came about following a conversation between Amy, and a senior lecturer environmental science at the college, and Kim Smith, executive director of BEST, on the need to inform and promote discussion on local issues. And that's just what we've been doing for the last 3 years. So I'm delighted to welcome Stratton, and Amy will do the introductions there. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I'm obviously Amy from Bermuda College, and we've been really grateful to have this partnership and have all these great speakers. So thanks, Stratton, for being our second this series. Stratton Hatfield is a young Bermudian who currently works for B Solar at full-time as a Director of Development, and is responsible for recruiting, sales, designing, and implementing marketing initiatives, as well as leading community outreach programs. He's been key at being a partner with Bermuda College students and helping to educate them about renewable energy sources on the island, as well as offering support for internships and even what's the word I'm looking for? Employment opportunities, thanks. But Stratton is an innovative leader with 10 years experience. He attended the Industrial Design School at Savannah College of Art and Design. He won the prestigious Chevening Award, which granted him a scholarship to go to the UK to study sustainability at Brunel University in London. And he's now back, giving back to the community. He's an active community leader, supporting nonprofit and government organizations such as Pechacucha, Kaleidoscope Arts Foundation, the Bermuda Arts Council, as well as the Sustainable Development Roundtable. So we're very happy to welcome Stratton Hatfield, who's going to talk about sustainability. It's all about balance. Thanks, Stratton.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to BEST and Bermuda College. It's an honor to be here presenting today and to be sharing some of the knowledge that I got from the degree that I pursued back in 2019. So today's lecture will be around sustainability and highlighting how it's all about balance. So working in the renewable energy industry, I often hear people connect the term sustainability to solar panels or wind turbines. When I say the word sustainability, I also hear responses centered around things like reusable shopping bags, sustainable fashion, reusable coffee cups, and recycling. Nowadays, more people are mentioning things like climate change, animal extinction, and plastic pollution in our oceans when I say the word sustainability. Without any doubt, all of these macro and micro areas that our society needs to address are certainly connected to the term sustainability. Today, I plan to share knowledge around the many facets of the term sustainability, and ultimately, why it's so important for us to focus on holistically incorporating the methodology into our personal and professional practices. Sustainability as a term has only really been used over the past 40 years, and it is certainly more commonly used today in businesses and households. The term was initially born out of the environmental movement in the 1970s and referenced in a book called The Silent Spring that was written by a woman named Rachel Carson. Her research highlighted critical and important facts about the chemical DDT, which was used to combat malaria in war zones like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. She wrote about how DDT was not only damaging the environments and ecosystems, but that the chemical was also damaging the people that inhabited these environments. Fast forward a few years to 1987, where this woman, Gro Harlem Brundtland, the first female prime minister of Norway, was appointed chair of a UN commission called the World Commission on Environment and Development. The goal of the commission was to address the deterioration of the human environment and our natural resources. The commission produced a report called Our Common Future, and the term sustainable development was coined. Back then, the term was largely focused on the natural environment and less on people and societies. Today, there are many definitions, and the term has certainly evolved over the years. But academically, it's defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. If you were to simplify it, it's about how we plan and make decisions that are centered around our collective future and on this finite planet. Yes, this finite planet, the only one we have that is inhabitable. As humans that inhabit this planet, we have a responsibility to strike a balance that ensures we are looking after people and the natural environments that we live in. On a macro level, sustainability is about the long-term maintenance of systems according to social, economic, and environmental considerations, like I've illustrated in this diagram. One example of countries coming together to address sustainable development has been through the efforts of the United Nations. In 1992, members of countries signed the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which had many components of sustainability within it. Later in 1995, the UN created the Conference of Parties, or also known as the COP. One of the main tasks of the COP has been to develop global policies around climate change and sustainable development. In November of this year, the 26th conference of the COP will be held in Scotland, and hopefully they're able to make even more urgent progress than previous years. To date, the challenges with the COP and within the UN, I must say, have been getting countries to have legally binding responsibilities to address sustainable development and to stop climate change. The Rio Earth Summit, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Climate Change Agreement are all outcomes of the COP. The Paris Climate Agreement is the first agreement to have legally binding goals for countries to achieve, so long as they are signed into the agreement. Thank goodness the USA has now joined the Paris Climate Agreement and is now finally demonstrating some climate change leadership. The UN has been focusing on ways to achieve sustainable development by promoting 17 globally recognized objectives known as the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Take a minute to look at these images and the associated goals. These goals are based around addressing areas such as poverty, hunger, education, and health. It is the intention of the UN and member states to achieve these goals by 2030, so within 9 years. You know, when I look at these goals, I wonder how Bermuda as a small island state and as a nation is achieving these goals. For example, we only have an estimated 3% of renewable energy in our energy mix now, and we have very high irresponsible consumption patterns as an example. But what can we do as a nation to really be focusing on achieving these sustainable development goals? This image sums up what sustainable development should look like. While one can argue that we need more equality in this world, it's more important for governments, businesses, and private citizens to focus on enhancing equity by enabling fair and just policies to help us meet our near and long-term social, economic, and environmental needs. When considering sustainable development, it's important to move away from traditional thinking and problem solving, which can be quite linear. When addressing topics related to sustainability, we need to move towards a methodology called systems thinking. Systems thinking helps us to connect and cross-reference different topics and shows how things are interrelated in the realms of social, economic, and environmental perspectives. This sort of process thinking really helps us to identify connections and to solve problems more holistically and to certainly be thinking about those three pillars that I just mentioned with social, economic, and environmental considerations. Sweden is very commonly incorporating sustainable development and sustainability principles into their policies and government. There's an institute in Sweden known as the Blekinge Institute, and they published a book that I studied while I was on my master's degree course called Strategic Leadership Towards Sustainability. In their literature, they reference 8 sustainability principles that are all about balance. 3 of them place an emphasis on protecting nature, and protecting nature by 1, reducing the extraction of resources from the earth, 2, eliminating harmful substances produced by society, and 3, stopping the degradation of the earth by physical means. The other 4 principles are related to society, and specifically removing obstacles to health, influence, competence, impartiality, and meaning making. The Blekinge Institute stressed that when planning for sustainability, these 8 principles must be equally considered and measured to determine progress and to ultimately determine how we can improve. When planning for sustainability within an organization or a company or even an individual's personal life, one must really consider, what is the vision? What is the vision that we are striving for in terms of sustainability, and how can we chart a path towards that vision? Without any collective vision that's connected to sustainability in mind, it's really hard for us to achieve sustainability. But it's really important for us to think about the future and how this relates to sustainability. Once the vision is established, we need to take a step back and come to the present. And it's important for us to complete an analysis to understand how we're doing well from a sustainability perspective and what we need to do better to achieve the sustainability vision. So we start to identify all of those kind of pros and cons related to the sustainability goals. Then you identify suitable actions to get towards that vision. And then you make plans to step through and to go through the appropriate actions to achieve that vision and to achieve those sustainability goals. In any organization, it's important to come up with a way to measure progress in sustainability and to also set standards. This is a really helpful exercise and tool that you can go through to plan for sustainability initiatives within an organization. And certainly important to be keeping in mind the long-term vision of this. You know, what is it that we're striving for? There was one example that I came across in my degree referred to as the Happy Planet Index. And this was an initiative that was designed to measure the sustainability of countries around the world. It's known as the HPI. They created a formula that multiplied data based off of well-being, life expectancy, and inequality. And they multiplied this and then divided that score by the country's carbon footprint to produce a sustainability score known as the Happy Planet Index. So the lighter green the countries are, the better they performed on the HPI. And the warmer the colors, the worse they performed. Life expectancy data was collected from Gallup surveys. Inequality data was collected from the United Nations and Gallup data. Well-being data was collected from the United Nations. And the ecological footprint was collected from the Global Footprint Network. So as you can see, as I'm going through these slides, you can see how these countries varied based off of the data that was supplied. And what this was able to do was to produce essentially a score. So interestingly, with the Happy Planet Index, which is the score that they produced back, I think in 2018 was the last time they did an HPI index. Costa Rica came first on the Happy Planet Index, so scoring really high in all of those calculations. Mexico actually came second, and Colombia came third. By comparison, these larger countries, like China, came 72nd out of 140 countries that were listed. The United States of America came 108th out of 140 countries. And then what I found really surprising was that the tiny country of Luxembourg came 139th out of 140 countries. So this was a really interesting measuring index, and one of many that's used, or that was used. Unfortunately, the website is no longer active, but I have to say, like, from a method, this certainly has some flaws. And if you were to think about well-being in communities, maybe that's a little bit harder to measure. But I do think that ultimately this sort of index is a good way of measuring a country's sustainability progress and what they can do. In the UK, an organization called Happy City created the Thriving Places Index, which measures the three main areas of counties within the UK, including sustainability and focusing on data around consumption, renewables, specifically renewable energy, land use, recycling, and emissions. They also measured local conditions such as education, economy, health, place, and community. And then lastly, they looked at equality. And they specifically measured things like well-being, health, social conditions, employment, and income. Their data analysis drives specifically into these areas. So if you look down and drill down into it more, you can see that they were pulling data from a variety of different areas to collect these scores. And these sort of scores help councils and policymakers to set benchmarks, create standards, and to determine where to allocate resources to enhance the health and well-being of the people and the environments they serve. To give you a snapshot of a score from a Thriving Places Index, this is the score from the borough of Hackney, which is actually the area that I lived in while I was living in London, studying for my degree. And as you can see by this data and this score, this county specifically has to focus on improving their local conditions with that low to medium score that they received. And if you break down the data even more, you can see that they have a lot of work to do around housing, the local environment, mental health, and basic needs being supplied to work in the local economy. By comparison, though, you can see that they perform quite well from the equality and sustainability perspective. So performing quite well from a health angle when it comes to equality, and also for energy use, as an example. So this sort of measuring index is a really helpful tool that helps to guide policy and helps not only the counties in the UK, but businesses and organizations to really understand like where the gaps are and where they can be filled to improve and enhance the sustainability initiatives within those counties. So, influenced by the United Nations OECD, the government of Bermuda first introduced principles of sustainable development to the island in 2004. And this was led by the then Premier Alexander Scott. A formal Sustainable Development Implementation Plan, also known as the SDIP, was developed in 2006 and then launched in 2008 after a 2-year series of stakeholder consultations and town hall gatherings. The SDIP was based on international guidelines prepared by the UN for setting a national sustainable development strategy for Bermuda. The plan laid out 5 key areas to focus on, including building and maintaining an inclusive, strong economy, transforming governance in the public sector, protecting and enhancing our environment and natural resources, sustaining our communities, and living within Bermuda's limits. The SDIP set out an extensive strategy to achieve these goals and actions, such as forming a sustainable development unit, which eventually became a department, which was known as the Sustainable Development Department. The SDIP recommended that the government revise the plan every 5 years and that an annual progress report be published. Despite momentum, in 2016, unfortunately, the Sustainable Development Department was defunded and placed back under the Central Policy Unit. And unfortunately, according to some sources, the unit is rarely consulted for policy development, and neither political parties have placed any emphasis on the original Sustainable Development Implementation Plan. To date, the SDIP has not been reviewed nor updated by the government. The SDU or the SDD, the Sustainable Development Unit or Department, they did create a local sustainability index, which was launched in 2007. And it was intended to help Bermuda measure the work involved with enhancing sustainability on the island. And yeah, it pulled data from healthcare, public safety, our economy, environment, public education, and housing to produce a grade, to produce a scorecard. And as you can see, back in 2007, we were getting that, basic C score, and then we were making progress. And all the way by the year 2013, we were getting a B- score on our Bermuda Sustainability Index. And it appears that the work was certainly producing some results. However, the department has not collected data since 2013. And we are no longer measuring our sustainability initiatives on the island. When it comes to sustainability, we have a lot to do in Bermuda. And so I wanted to provide some examples to illustrate the interconnectedness of sustainability as it relates to decision-making. As climate change looms and food security becomes more critical, we have an opportunity to enhance our social, economic, and environmental pillars by growing more food locally, which in turn will help people to eat healthier food, rely less on imported food, and then ultimately to reduce the cost of living. So this example and these images here are really highlighting how we can focus on food security and we can focus on sustainability by considering the social, economic, and environmental considerations and impacts that addressing food security can do. I like to call this a win-win-win, really achieving those three pillars. To give another example of systems thinking as it relates to enhancing sustainable development, I will use something that we all need: energy. Environmentally, wind turbines will help reduce our reliance and consumption of fossil fuel, which will help to reduce our energy costs, which will help to save money and keep it in our local economy. This sort of decision will help the people, it will help the planet, and it will help profits. And once again, when you're looking at it from the pillars of social, economic, and environmental sustainability, this is another example of a win-win-win scenario. And these are the sort of things that we need to be considering when making long-term decisions for our community: is how can we help the people? How can we help our planet? And yes, how can we help the profits and make the profits be more sustainable and beneficial to the people and the planet that they're serving? Ultimately, sustainable development is about balance, and it is about planning for the future. It's about holistically considering social equity, such as the standard of living, accessible education, good paying jobs, and equal opportunities. Sustainable development is about economic resilience, such as sustained growth, cost savings, increased productivity, and keeping more money in our local economy. And lastly, it's about environmental conservation, such as natural resource use and managing our natural resource use, reducing pollution and preventing pollution, protecting the biodiversity both on land and in the sea, and implementing clean renewable energy into our energy infrastructure. Ask yourself when you're looking at this graphic, how can you enhance and incorporate the concepts of sustainability into your everyday personal and professional lives? I'd like to thank BEST and the Bermuda College for this opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I gained while pursuing my master's degree in sustainability, entrepreneurship, and design. And I'd like to now take questions from the audience and encourage you to ask any thought-provoking questions while we're here on this live stream. Thank you.
Thank you, Stratton. That was really interesting, and just show you one of the comments so far from Claire P. Said it was amazing. I have to agree with her. Just waiting for a few questions to come in, but in the meantime, I was hoping I could grow you with a question or two. So you mentioned the word equity and equality, 2 words, but equity is something that I'm always, concerned about, and in Bermuda, there's the issue of not everyone having equitable access to maybe partaking in a sustainable lifestyle because of the cost of living here and what it costs to kind of do some of those things that we want people to do, but maybe can't afford to. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important to consider what some people refer to as the butterfly effect or the ripple effect, and understand that like every little thing that you do makes a difference to achieve sustainability. And while at times it could seem like it's cost prohibitive to be doing certain things connected to sustainability, it's important to kind of step back and think about like how you as an individual can achieve that. For example, tending to a garden is a labor of love, and it certainly requires time and hard work to grow that food. But it's something that will provide you with a lot of value in the end, both like mentally and physically, but also like helping you to connect with the earth and to help you reduce the amount of money that you're spending on groceries. So I think it's important to really consider like all of the different elements associated with sustainability and how like every little bit that you do can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about just going and buying an electric vehicle or purchasing solar panels, for example. It's something as simple as like maybe I can stop eating meat as much or dairy as much, or maybe I can focus on reducing my electricity bill by turning off the lights or putting timers on my water heaters. Or maybe I can focus on educating myself more with free webinars or free lectures to understand what I can do to teach more people about sustainability. So really thinking about the power of the individual and what we can do to make a difference is really important when talking about sustainability. And that's certainly something that all of us can do regardless of what sort of access we have to funding or to money.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah.
Whilst I certainly agree all of us on an individual basis should do what we can, it's still not going to be enough. And as you highlighted in the presentation, one government, Premier Scott, started out with the very best of intentions, and yet that's just been allowed to drop. And it does need direction from government. We do need government to get on board with sustainability, and they're not. I mean, if we look at government's actions, sustainability is probably the last thing they're thinking about, to be perfectly honest, even though I know they're talking about electric cars at the moment. So I guess my question is, how do we as individuals, besides doing what we can do individually, but collectively, we need to move government? How?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it does kind of go back to the power of individuals coming together to collectively push initiatives forward. I think, as climate change is on our back doorstep, it's important for us to really think about resilience and the need for us to prepare for the impacts of climate catastrophe. And we as a community need to be applying more pressure to our elected officials to be focusing on these sort of long-term plans so that we can make our community more resilient. So I think that it's really important for us to be applying pressure in our own ways, whether it's through organizations like BEST or the Bermuda College, encouraging student groups to get together to write petitions or to lobby their elected officials to be promoting sustainability, or even thinking about it from a grander perspective is like, how could we infiltrate organizations to be really pushing for sustainability. You see a lot of private businesses now putting corporate social responsibility and environmental responsibility into their vision and mission statement. And they're certainly leading by example in that regard. So just continuing to apply pressure to the government to focus on this, I think, is one avenue to consider.
Yeah. I agree about the pressure. But I was trying not to bring COVID up, but you can't help it. It's happening. Yeah. So I feel like in the last year, we've regressed quite a bit, especially with local businesses who were trying to be sustainable, but obviously with the restrictions of the pandemic and whatnot, have slipped quite a bit. But I feel like some of it is maybe not necessary. They didn't have to slip so far. So how can we kind of bring those businesses back on side to just embracing those behaviors that they were once doing but no longer are adopting?
I think because we're in a small community, as consumers, we forget the sort of power that we have to be pushing and encouraging companies to move towards more of a sustainability direction. If you look at something like Madge's list on Facebook, that has a lot of power to send a company or an individual in any direction. So thinking about how to kind of use those tools to apply pressure to businesses to be focusing more on sustainability initiatives. And I also think that don't forget like what sort of power you has as a consumer to really be encouraging this, like writing to the company, calling the general manager, or even choosing to boycott the organization and letting them know that you are, because they're not taking responsibility for sustainability. Those are all good examples of kind of the power of consumers.
Yeah. This was kind of going back to what we were just talking about, but Malay Robinson had kind of pointed out, is it the downfall in Bermuda? Is it like our local mindset, or is it at the government level? We were kind of discussing that already, but what if you could add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think the government has kind of dropped this because the people have not been really stressing it or pushing for it. I think that it's important for us to go back and think about people power and what we can do collectively as a community to really be encouraging and almost demanding the government to be focusing on sustainable development, and really get them to kind of put this back onto the front burner and have it be something that's incorporated as a philosophy into all of the policies and decisions that are going through the Central Policy Unit and Cabinet.
Just a question here that's kind of switching us over to the energy side of things from Bina Smith. Is magnet generator effective in producing electricity for residential purposes? Something I actually haven't heard of.
So that's a really good question. And I'm not versed enough to be able to talk about that, unfortunately. I think from wearing my hat at Be Solar, we like solar photovoltaic electric energy because there are no moving parts. It means that there's minimal maintenance and guaranteed energy. Some of the newer technology or this sort of technology, I don't really know enough about for it to be for Bermuda.
Yeah, but for Bermuda going forward, what is the best renewables for our energy portfolio in your opinion?
Yeah, so definitely solar and wind technology. On a utility scale, wind energy has proven to be the least expensive energy source for Bermuda to harvest. And then second would be solar energy. So if we can start to focus on those two renewable energy sources to begin with, uh, while complementing it with energy efficiency and really focusing on reducing our peak demand by upgrading old appliances or upgrading air conditioning units, or even installing timers on water heaters, closet heaters and stuff like that, that will help to reduce the amount of energy we need, and then it can be supplemented by renewable energy and eventual energy storage as well.
Just another comment or comment and question from Richie Zoriak. Very insightful. Has data come out regarding global pollution, since air travel has been reduced in recent times? Hard to balance between tourism and reducing the carbon footprint for Bermuda.
To some of my basic knowledge, I understand that air pollution has dropped due to less air travel. I think that we're also dealing with the challenge of increased transportation to deliver and move things around in certain jurisdictions. So, we're reducing the amount of air travel, but then there's more trucks and cars and things pushing products around. Now, like for example, in the US, people are relying more on delivery services. So I'd be interested to see what that data is around in terms of air pollution reduction. But last time I was looking at it, air pollution travel has definitely dropped since the pandemic started.
Yeah.
What was that question, Amy?
Sorry. Well, I guess it was looking for what is it? Has any data come out about the global pollution since air travel has stopped? But studies so far have shown that the air temperature has not come down significantly in 2020 because of committed warming. So there's still so much of the CO2 levels up in the atmosphere from past activities that lockdowns and reduction of air travel hasn't really had much impact on lowering of the average global temperature for the year. I think it was second to one of the highest years, which I think was 2016. So unfortunately, this kind of COVID reduction of movement hasn't been enough to do anything on the climate change side of things.
Right. Yeah, we have a lot more work to do. And I have to say, like, governments have a lot more work to do to push industry to really be changing the way in which they do things. For example, fossil fuel industries, building industries, agricultural industries. These are the main contributors to CO2 levels and climate change. So while we can have an impact as individuals in our societies, it's also up to the governments to be pushing these industries to be changing their habits too.
Yeah. You mentioned I think 17 goals for sustainable development through the UN.
Yeah.
Which do you think is the one that we should prioritize, or which couple should we prioritize as a country, if you were to pick?
Yeah, let me go back to this, and then I can bring it up for us. So, if we were to prioritize these, like, I would say, like, starting 1 through to 5 as a starting point. Ending poverty in a small island state is something that's certainly achievable. especially when we're thinking about the size of the population here. But eliminating hunger and encouraging good health and quality education and gender equality, those are all things that I feel like are certainly things that we should be focusing on as a community. The biggest one that sticks out for me, however, is actually number 17, partnerships for the goals. I really do feel as though this is an important thing for us to be considering as a small community. You know, how can we be collaborating and working together to be achieving these goals rather than operating in silos and doing our own individual things? What can we do to foster more collaboration to be achieving these by the year 2030?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And unfortunately, COVID has kind of forced us into these silos or bubbles. But I think it's something that we'll have to fight to kind of get that connection back. And like you say, I think it's going to be all about partnerships to win this.
Definitely.
Yeah, if I can just interject there, that is one of BEST's primary goals in reviewing how BEST has been working and what we're going to do in the future. We are looking at working far more collaboratively with other organizations with any connection to the environment. And just last Friday, we had a meeting. There were 26 people there representing, I think it was possibly 13 or 14 different organizations on the issue that we were looking at in this particular case is plastic pollution. And COVID has affected that, obviously, because while we were beginning to make inroads with the advent of COVID, it was back to square one with plastic utensils, plastic containers, plasticized masks that you find all over the streets and wherever, bottled water. So we're revisiting that to get the government moving on their pledge to ban one-time plastics, and also to make the public more aware of the real, very, very real health hazards to humans of plastic waste. So yes, collaboration is hugely important.
Very much so. Thank you, Jennifer. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and collaboration and education, and that kind of segues into the next question. How can we educate Bermuda on a national level about living a sustainable lifestyle? Because at the moment, the general feeling is that just people aren't aware or not educated enough or don't have access to this type of education. It's just not on their radar. So how do we go about that as a country?
I mean, I think an initiative like this is a really good starting point. What I loved seeing coming out of the Sustainable Development Department when it was active was that they were doing many town hall meetings and interactive forums and workshops to address those 5 key points that were listed. And yeah, I think that's another really great way of engaging with the community. I think, with the advent of social media these days, we have an opportunity to really be promoting and encouraging sustainability through those avenues. But in the end, like it's going to be a joint effort, and it's going to be having to come from multiple different angles. I'd love to see the Bermuda College having a course or courses around sustainability and sustainable development, and thinking about how Bermuda has the potential to kind of be a beacon of sustainability and to lead in this realm to help other jurisdictions, both small and large, understand not only why we need to think about sustainable development, but why we need to incorporate it into our policies to, like I said, make our community more resilient and less susceptible to climate change, but less susceptible to social inequities or environmental injustices.
Yeah, agreed. And not to bring up COVID again, but it's unavoidable. But that has certainly shown how prevalent environmental justice and environmental inequality is amongst socioeconomic groups that are, just not able to have that resilience against the disease or against, your paycheck being cut, or now you don't have access to electricity because there's been a snowstorm in your area or whatnot. just not having that protection because they don't have equal access or, or just whatnot, don't have the same opportunities. So how do we kind of make it a level playing field and stop the significant disparities in our community, which do exist in Bermuda too?
Exactly. Yeah. So really thinking holistically about how we can address those while thinking about kind of environmental and economic resilience as well.
Exactly. Sorry. Just segueing back, you were mentioning food security. So we have another question here. With limited land and resources, how do we produce mass food locally? Mass food production. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in considering like all of the available resources we have to scale up and deploy initiatives. There's not going to be one silver bullet that's going to address this problem that we have. I think it's like 75% or 80% of the food that we consume on island is imported. And there's not only an opportunity for us to be focusing on small scale farming, really where that we are enriching our soil and growing food, in small backyard gardens, but also thinking about on a larger scale, what sort of technology can be deployed to use hydroponics and to be growing food indoors, and to be considering vertical farming as well to get scale and to increase production and yield. So I think that it's a multi-pronged approach. Even when we're thinking about our marine economic environment zone, which I think has recently been protected in certain ways and in certain areas, there's a lot of opportunity for us to feed our community with the sea life that exists out in the ocean as well. So considering every different opportunity there is important for us to really address food security.
Yeah. Well, we have a course here at Bermuda College, to give it a bit of a plug, on hydroponics with Mr. Weeks in Tech Hall. So I believe it's through PACE, but you can check our college website for information. But yeah, just all these alternatives and having many prongs in our eggs in our basket, so to speak, to build up that resilience is, I guess, the way forward. Just to ask you another question. You mentioned the HPI, which was a really interesting study and index, and the Thriving Places Index. And I know we tried to do our own Bermuda Sustainability Index. But if you were to think of us through the viewpoint of the HPI and the Thriving Places Index, where would you place us on those ones? If you were to take a stab at placing us in our current situation of how we are in the sustainable status.
If we go back to the HPI, well-being, life expectancy, and equality. I don't think that we're performing too well on that sort of stuff. I also don't think that we're collecting data around those things enough. Well-being and equality being the main ones. I think life expectancy is something that we're collecting. But when you're looking at our carbon footprint, this is where we perform really badly based off of our consumption patterns and the lack of renewable energy sources that have been deployed on the island. So I think that we would score quite low there. When it comes to the Thriving Places Index, I think that we certainly, are doing okay in some regards, but there certainly is much more room for improvement. And when we're thinking about sustainability, local conditions, and equality, there's a lot of work that we need to do if we were to think about scoring this and improving it.
It was interesting because we were both commenting on the winners of those indexes, or the HPI anyway, and not places that you would automatically think would win, because you kind of think of them as up and coming countries to be whereas the countries that you would expect were actually the affluent countries did quite poorly. So
I think it goes to say that like the affluent countries are not the ones that are really focusing on reducing their carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back here, you can see, these like all of Europe, for example, United States and Canada, Australia, all of these nations are doing really poorly in terms of their ecological footprint. However, when you're looking at it from the perspective of well-being, they are doing much, much better. So yeah, I was surprised when I saw Colombia on there.
Yeah.
Because I think of them as a country that aren't doing too well with well-being, with all of the cartels and all of the issues they've had with government and stuff like that. I found that really interesting. Likewise for Mexico. But yeah, I think that all of these measuring indexes have their flaws, and it's something to consider. Is like when you're designing something for a jurisdiction, how is it appropriate for that, and is it really modeling and measuring sustainability?
I think it's Bhutan that uses a happiness index.
Yeah, they do.
And they seem to come out on top, and they've also recently done a total ban on importation of pesticides, and I think I'm right here, and gone totally over to organic farming.
That's
and
awesome.
Again, this is something, as an island, we should have a lot more control of our borders as to what comes in. And we know pesticides are extremely harmful to health, environmental health and human health.
Yeah.
And yet you can just buy them straight off the shelf without any instruction on how to use them, how often to apply them, or what have you. But because they are so convenient, in inverted commas, and the effects are invisible for quite a while, they're still overused, I feel. But that's, that affects everything.
I agree. Yeah, so Bhutan's gross happiness index is really interesting because they moved away from GDP and they really started to center their development around health and well-being and connecting it back to the environment as well. And I feel like we are extremely well suited to be implementing a model that measures health and well-being in our community. And that would be, once again, like another really great example of demonstrating leadership with regards to thinking about sustainability holistically and what we could do to measure that and then to show the progress that we're making with it. It was nice that Bermuda had one of the highest GDPs, back in the 2000s, but we still have poverty and we still have hunger and we still have a bad health system and a poor education system, and GDP is not measuring that. So how can we have another model to measure that?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy people, happy planet, as you say.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah, and really thinking about the 3 Ps and thinking about people first, planet, and then profits.
Right. Yes.
Oh, I know it as a different thing. Pollution prevention pays. That's another 3 Ps. What did you say? People, planet, profits.
Profit.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how things will shift, after this year, because I don't know, your whole thing is about finding balance, and COVID has kind of forced us to be not only out of balance, but having to find a new balance constantly. And I just worry about, you said people first, and I just worry about, this whole remote living or in bubbles, how it's going to affect people finding their own balance before they can even think about the other pillars of sustainability, and whether or not companies or whatnot will take advantage of that, because it's a different setup. But I don't know if it's necessarily good for the people to be at home working, or in your bed learning or whatnot. So it'd just be interesting to see how things will change and whether they're going to be sustainable, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, as we start to come out of the pandemic, we can't carry on with the same ways that we were doing things. And it's important for us to think about innovative ways to change this paradigm and to be incorporating more sustainability philosophies into our decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly looking at it from our own personal levels, but also like within any of the organizations or businesses that we're a part of.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, you mentioned having vision for the future and then bringing it back to the present. So from your perspective and for your vision for Bermuda, what would be your kind of ideal wish list to get us on track to getting back to meeting our sustainable goals?
Yeah, I think it would be centered around social equity, economic resilience, and environmental conservation. And really thinking about those three pillars and what that represents. If we're striving for a Bermuda for all Bermudians that is prosperous and healthy, I'd like to think that those three components would be incorporated into it.
Thank you. Thank you, Stratton. This was such an interesting talk, and
yes,
from the comments coming through, people really enjoyed it. And it's just so relevant and so pertinent to what we're going through and what we need to think about for the future, because it's not something that can be forgotten. I really think it needs to be reactivated at the government level. And as someone said, it also needs to come from the bottom up. So yeah, it's just something that needs to be just part of our everyday systems thinking, as you said. So I really appreciate you bringing this to our community, and hopefully, more people will start thinking like you, and we'll have a happy Bermuda.
Yes,
a happy, healthy Bermuda.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Jennifer and I have been speaking about this for over a year now, and pandemic pushed it back a couple of times, but I'm really grateful that we were able to do this, and I thank you kind of for putting a little bit more fire underneath of me now to say, like, how can I use all of this knowledge to really be pushing this in our community? And I've even been inspired to say, like, well, I've got all of this information now. How could I write an article or an opinion piece to go into the paper or onto Burn News, or even do something
great.
Media Maya to be getting more people talking about this and thinking about it. So I look forward to taking this to another level now and really getting it out into the community some more. But thank you to the college and to Best for hosting this. I really do appreciate it.
And thank you.
And for those who have been watching, you can still share this with your friends and your community, because it will be on YouTube permanently now. So you can revisit it if you need the information from any of the slides or from what Stratton was saying. And you can also share that link with anybody else who might have missed it.
Yes. And also just to let you know that we have another one coming up in March, the 25th, the last Thursday of March, same time, 1 to 2. And Dr. Chris Fosker is going to be speaking about the impacts of the environment on cancer and the impacts of cancer on our environment. So something that's obviously really crucial for Bermuda, as we have high cancer rates on our island. So I'm sure people will be interested to hear about that. So thank you, Stratton Hatfield. This was a really great talk, looking at the three pillars, looking at finding balance, which is so crucial right now for all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.